Welcome to This Week in Coworking, where industry leaders get succinct, actionable insights. Here are your hosts, Hector Colones and Mike LaRosa.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the This Week in Coworking Weekly Recap. My name is Mike LaRosa, and for all of you out there that listen to the podcast and read the newsletter, you all know how hard Hector Colones works day in and day out. And so I'm so excited to say that he's actually on vacation this week, taking it
Yay.
easy, enjoying a much well-deserved break. But in his stay, we've got an awesome guest with us, a guest co-host. Her name is Amina Moreau, and she's the founder and CEO of Radius. Amina and I were actually seated next to each other at an event in Montreal a few years back. And since meeting her in person, we've, of course, kept in touch via LinkedIn through the magic of social media. And I've been such a big fan of not only the visual quality of her content, but also the things that she has to say in her perspective, that when I was thinking about who could I have be a great guest co-host, she was top of my list. So welcome, Amina. Glad to have you here. I know that we'll be talking a little bit about different types of platforms and booking platforms. We've got some in the news, but would you like just to share for a brief moment just what your platform is and what brought you to the industry?
Yeah, sure. I have a lot of frustrations with how the world works. And man, oh man, as a chronic entrepreneur, all I know is startups. I want to solve all of them. And no one person can fix the whole world. But this little corner of the world that is flex work and everything that the pandemic inspired. Oh, it's so exciting. And so during the pandemic, partly as a coping mechanism, so I would just be distracted away from everything that was happening, I co-founded Radius, which in a nutshell is a platform that's similar to Airbnb in concept, but instead of renting houses out as hotels and overnight accommodations, we take houses, but also some other types of properties too, and we turn them into private meeting and workspaces. And the reason that we've gravitated towards homes and apartments more so than traditional, like just office buildings that are typically more downtown is because we've gotten used to having the comforts of home for our workday. It's a more unique experience than booking a hotel conference room. If it's in a residential property, it's probably in a residential area, so it cuts the commute and it gives you a level of privacy that you might not have in a more commercial, like rentable conference room. So, pretty excited about it and like to challenge the status quo because the status quo needs a little challenging, if you ask me.
For sure. And I think that's something that we really bonded over sitting next to each other at
Yeah.
that dinner, because I've shared with you, there's been so many projects I've worked on in the past that were most definitely co-working. People were connecting and being productive, and those in the industry were, that's not co-working. And so when we first met, I was like, this is such a cool concept. And we've talked a bunch offline and also on messaging back and forth about different types of spaces that we like working in. I had just mentioned to you that my favorite type of co-working space is actually an airport lounge. You teased me a little bit. You said
Mhm.
that there's something that I should know about that I maybe not, I'm not quite sure about. Without further ado, keep me waiting.
If you are ever in my neck of the woods in Portland, Oregon, and you fly into PDX, make sure to hang out there because they just spent $3 billion renovating the airport, not just to make it more comfortable for travelers, but I've heard rumors that part of the motivation for the reno was to simply attract people in the area to go and spend time there to shop, to co-work, to eat. And so they're trying to actually make it a destination, even if you're not traveling. So if you like co-working in airport lounges, it's not just the airport lounge that you're going to like at PDX. It is absolutely gorgeous.
I'll have to check that out. I haven't been to Portland since I think 2019, but I know that there are airports out there that are trying to encourage non-passenger visits, right? Pittsburgh International now has a program where you can get through security, where you don't have to have a ticket. And I've only actually seen like a real co-working space in one airport. Richmond International actually had a county funded like meeting room that you can rent, but
Oh,
I'll have
cool.
to put that on my
Very
list.
cool.
So
Cool.
without further ado, in Hector's honor, I know he always loves to share celebrations and big market moves. So we're going to blow through a couple different announcements for expansions. This week, a lot of the news coming out of Europe. And so we've got a Polish co working operator, Be In Offices. That's going to be opening up their 11th location. And this brand, founded in 2020, is really focusing on Class A buildings. And so, for those of you that listen and read and keep up on all these trends on This Week in Coworking, we know that Poland is one of the fastest growing markets for Flex Workspace in the EU. So this was really exciting to hear about their plans. We've also got a unique operator. I didn't realize this. Work Lounge, which is a primarily in Prague. They were founded in Florida. So their first location
Hmm.
was in Florida, and then their next 6 locations have been in Prague in the Czech Republic. So that's interesting to see that now they're going to be opening up location number 7 back here on the state side. Haven Collective, which is an Ohio born and bred co-working brand, they're actually announcing their first partner location, and so they'll be working with an individual to open up a new branded location called Will Work by Haven Collective. And I believe they're actually going to be having a webinar talking about the background as to how this happened and the who, the what, and the why. And then last but not least, or maybe we've got 2 more, Watso, we're going to go down under. Watso, which is a frequent mention here in the This Week in Co-working newsletter, they're actually announcing a new partnership with a actual traditional club in Sydney. So that's going to be really interesting to see, and that will touch on a topic that we're going to dive into a little bit more. That and I will chat about the collision of hospitality and traditional versus flex. And then last but not least, those of you that have been in the industry for quite a while, Beta House, one of the OGs of OGs in Europe, this is really interesting. They're taking over a former WeWork location in Hamburg, Germany. So those are the co-working market moves for the week. Before we jump on to the next topic, any thoughts on that?
I just think it's fascinating to see not just what different companies across various industries are doing, but across the world and different countries, right? You mentioned Poland. I actually have Polish heritage. And also, as a dual Canadian American citizen, I've been so interested to see the comparison. And actually, I think it was yesterday, I posted a little summary of Flex Index's findings of US versus Canadian trends on remote, hybrid, and fully in office, and breakdowns on sizes of companies and comparing those different sizes across the 2 countries. And it's so fascinating because it's so easy to get into a bubble and just assume that what we're doing here in whatever corner of the country we are in, that's the norm. And it really isn't. And it's fascinating to expand and learn from others because it's so different everywhere.
Yeah, it's easy to, as you mentioned, just get stuck in your bubble, right? And just be focused, whether it be your immediate market, your region, or just your country. But I think that's one of the things I love the most about Flex and co-working is that it's happening everywhere, right? And it's these different shapes and colors and sizes, and a lot of times also has impact based on cultural, just traditions. We saw at the tail end of peak COVID, the return to office wasn't really mandated in Asia. People were going back to offices, but we were asking ourselves why. That's because, culturally speaking, they're more likely to have possibly multi generations in their homes. The homes are smaller. The mass transit is more affordable and easier.
Yeah.
Because we see here in the States, the return to office, the real kind of friction there has been the time or cost of commute.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to see. And I'm gonna flip the agenda real fast because you did mention just it's so interesting to see what's going on around the world. And we were chatting pre-recording. I pride myself on having been in this industry for quite a while and thinking I know all the platforms. But there's a platform, Pluria, that was in the newsletter this week that's based in Latin America. I'll be honest with you, I had never heard of that. which I'm embarrassed, but also it is what it is. But they actually shared really great news that this past month they broke a record for having 10,000 workdays booked in a single month. And so I think that, to your point, it's a great reminder to turn to resources like This Week in Co-working or just through different networking events. You're based in Portland. I was based in Florida at the time. We met in Montreal, right? That's how you
Yeah.
connect with people. You go all over the place. But it's just interesting to see that much like Radius, there's different platforms out there that are popping up for different needs and different purposes. And so it's wow, like 10,000 workdays is like a legitimate, sizable business, right?
Yeah,
For 1 month.
absolutely. And just what a great example of like raising the tides for everyone too. I mentioned at the top of our conversation that I have a lot of frustrations with how inefficient things are. And it's so inspiring and exciting to see movement in this direction. Because one of my specific frustrations has been how binary the thinking has been, right? It's either in office days in a traditional lease office or working
Yeah.
from home or some split of the two. But that's a really one dimensional spectrum. And it's actually two, maybe even three dimensional if you factor in flex space, third spaces, etc. And then time, right? When we work, how we work. There's so much there. And but even just addressing the where, finally the world is opening its mind and taking the blinders off, and the fact that they have reached this milestone of monthly bookings is just so fantastic to see. Like we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and I love the phrase "a rising tide" because really, even though I do joke that there's still new platforms. Like clearly, Pluria isn't new because they've got significant traction. But occasionally, we will hear or I'll get a pitch email or encounter someone online where it's like, "Oh, you're just starting a booking platform," and I'm like, "Okay, I wish you the best of luck. It's going to be a lot more difficult
It's
than you
tough.
think it."
Yeah.
You think you might, and I think one of those things that makes it so difficult is the legality of these things. And so that leads me to our next topic for this week's newsletter. We always love to share really great, thoughtful content marketing. And our friends at Space Spring, they really do such a great job. They've got a really thorough article that they shared about don't get sued, legal tips for co working spaces. And so I know I've got my fair share of thoughts on this, having been a former operator and also having been someone who was trying to sell a booking solution into enterprise, right? Where the first thing, because when you're trying to sell into any enterprise, you have to go through procurement, right? There's the legal team, and then there's IT, and then there's InfoSec, and there's this and this. But it's one thing to try to navigate insurance for just being your own operator, let alone navigating insurance for a third party of a traditional co-working space. I'd love to get your thoughts. Like you shared with me that some of the things that they shared in this post resonated with you
Yeah.
because you've also had to navigate a non-traditional type of workspace. What say you? I'd love to get your hot take on this.
Yeah. And also, just quickly before I go there, let me just give them another extra shout out for how they put together the article, because the TLDR was cover your bases. Have a contract that is really clear, that outlines as much as is physically possible, basically, right? But then they go further and they're like, here are the categories you need to be thinking about, and here are the subcategories. And so it's really detailed. So you're not left wondering, so what are those things that I have to include? It's very comprehensive. But one of those sections is insurance. And that hits so close to home for me because Radius is turning homes into collaborative workspaces. That translates into commercial use of residential buildings. Like there are zoning implications, there are liability implications. It is so outside the box that it took us over 2 years to find insurance partners that were even willing to touch it with a 10-foot pole, let alone actually contract with us. And it took a lot of meaningful discussion with, like, we had to kiss a lot of frogs until we found a partner that we absolutely love in Wavo that is also startup minded. They are a startup themselves. They created their company out of they're a spinoff effectively, and they are entrepreneurial themselves and read the tea leaves that the future of work is flexible, and that the pandemic turned practically every home into a workspace because we were all forced into it. And so it's time for regulatory sphere to change with the times. That doesn't happen overnight either. And so it takes a, a little bit of risk tolerance. So we found that partner, but let me tell you, it's not easy. And it's not going to be easy moving forward for a lot of companies that are thinking outside the box.
Yeah, I always say that you want to go into things with the best of intentions. And the majority of co-working operators out there, I know that they want to foster community, they want to provide spaces for people to be productive, but you really do have to put on that worst case scenario cap, right? And you have to bring out that inner lawyer and
Yeah.
nitty gritty and understand what is the worst case scenario and understanding the nuances between the liabilities you have if you are leasing the space versus the liabilities that you might then share with the owner if you're simply just managing it, because then who's responsible? And these are like such nitty gritty pieces of, okay, the management company might not be responsible for the infrastructure maintenance. And so, what happens if someone trips and falls because the sidewalk was not properly
Sure.
maintained? And so that can't be up to management company if they were diligently notifying the owner that, hey, this is a problem. This needs to be maintained or repaired. But yeah, the spaces or the Space Bring wrote this amazing blog post, and they'll dive into management agreements, they dive into privacy and data security. I know Hector always nails home the importance of IT network infrastructure. And I hate to say that people would target co-working spaces, but sometimes these spaces, I always bring up the example of the Wi-Fi password's been written on a whiteboard for 2 years straight. So then why would you not be surprised if someone could then be sitting outside and infiltrate that network? Or even I always use that example of I never plug anything directly into a port anywhere publicly, right? Because people can program those little USB ports, right? To then put in malware. So it's all these different things. I think that as more people use flex workspaces, there's going to be that. I always say it's such a shame criminals put so much of their smarts and their brains to nefarious activities. What would the possibility be if they put it to good use, right? But it's always shocking how many
Yeah.
people try to find ways to get you. So, yeah, I do encourage you all to check out that blog post for sure. The last one that knew was on my radar, but didn't even think about until I read it was even intellectual property concerns. And I think that's something that you lean into a little bit with, the benefits of Radius, because I've had enterprise customers that wanted to use a booking platform, but then they wanted to have a guarantee that there was no competitor in that building the same day that their team booked a conference
That's
room.
a
And
tough
and
one.
I and I was like, I'd love that too, but for an operator that's sizable, that has maybe 4 or 5 floors of a building, right? I won't say the name, but they are a very well-known brand actually based in Portland. They
Mm,
didn't want any other competition to potentially even be on the premise during that day. And so
yeah.
I was like, if you're using a third party booking app, unfortunately, there's no way that I can go to that operator and be like, okay, anyone that's wearing 3 stripes isn't allowed in to the building for these 4 hours that the swoosh team is maybe on
Yeah.
site. But yeah, I think intellectual property is most definitely, you
It's
can't
huge.
leave your stuff up on the whiteboard, right? You got to
Yeah.
make sure you wipe that whiteboard. But without being a shameless plug, that is, I think, something that you lean into is more of that privacy because it is a
Absolutely.
dedicated private
Because
space.
instead of booking a conference room on a floor with multiple other companies, and most of the time those conference rooms tend to be transparent because they're just glass walls, and then you can sometimes even overhear, not just peer in to see what's
Yeah.
on the whiteboard. Yeah, one of our biggest value props is that when you book with us, the building is yours. Or if you're getting together with 10 people, you have complete control over the 9 that you're inviting, aside from, and it's 100% yours for the hours or the days that you've booked it for, and that's huge. It's just absolutely.
It's wild to think of all the things that you have to take into consideration. But the main topic that I've been dying to chat with you today, because I feel like we've really bonded over it the most, is we've I always say, and I will sound like a broken record, what I love the most about This Week in Coworking is it really helps us as, folks in the industry see not just immediate weekly news, but understand these like ongoing trends. And most definitely a trend that we're seeing is this collision of hospitality and kind of the kind of interconnection or the headbutting of traditional versus flex. But then within flex, there was the is this or is this not co working? And for years, there's been that debate of who's the person who made you king to define what co working is, right? There's a project I did that I worked on years ago that I saw people working, I saw people collaborating, they were connecting, they were productive. And then I had someone tell me that's not real co working. If that's not co working, I don't know what is. A couple of the pieces that we included this week were a podcast that Jamie Hodari just did with CBRE, which really goes into the background behind why he is in this new experiential role, right? And then
Yeah.
Johnny Rosenblatt, who has been a guest of the podcast before, talking about a conversation, or I guess an industry event that he was a part of. And this jumped out at you as well. I'd love to get your take before I start chiming in and get on my soapbox.
Yeah, it's just incredible how much things have shifted. So first of all, y- I felt slightly triggered with the part of the conversation about what is this legitimately co-working? Who cares? I guess
Yeah,
is my
exactly.
why? Like why do we even need to define I am all for alignment around terms. Yes, I
Yeah.
do think we need to know that we're talking about the same thing, but why does it matter in an overall context whether something fits into a box perfectly or not? That's boring, frankly. And we don't need more of the same. We do need to innovate. That's just me on my soapbox for a moment. But I do think that the hospitality angle is more important now than ever. And it's a generational thing. It's it's the fact that it's not just enough to have a cubicle anymore. If I were to put a foundational synopsis on it, I would just say that, and look, maybe this is going to sound cliche, but the genie is out of the bottle in the sense that during the pandemic, people have gotten a taste of what freedom is like and that they could design their lives. With work, it's being a great component of that. But having a sense of purpose and autonomy in your life is just a part of optimal well-being, let alone productivity and innovation and all those things that we want in a work context, right? So where I think the hospitality piece fits in is that it allows for working professionals to feel like they are being invested in as much as they are investing their time, expertise, and energy into growing the company that they work for. It's just a two-way street, in my view. And so the hospitality shouldn't just come from the space provider, it's got to come from the employer and have it be a collaborative spirit. That's what I'd like to see more of.
Yeah, you raise a really good point. I'd love to get your thoughts on. I think that these corporations and these employers, it's not new for them to be outsourcing their physical office space, right? Serviced offices are not new. They've been around since the late 70s, early 80s, right? In the day and age of pagers and fax machines. But I think what we were started to change was they were trying to outsource the culture as well. They were outsourcing the not just the physical office, but the feel of the office and the vibe. And
Mhm.
so I think employers or employees, maybe they can see through that. But I would love to get your thoughts on what really is the driving force. Is it generational? Is it people seeing or different generations having a different perspective of what they want from an employer? I know millennials get beat up all the time for a slew of different things, and then now the new generation to kick around is, I believe it's Gen Z, whether they're vibing or not. But I think the when I think of hospitality colliding into workspace, I'm viewing it from a couple different lenses, right? I'm viewing it from the actual transaction and the accessibility of it, right? I always say that office space is becoming hotelified, right? No different than Uber. I want to find something, or like an Airbnb, or like I want to be able to find something, book it, and then also get in without any issues. But then there's also um the level of service that you get once you're inside it. And then
Yeah.
some companies want that added component, and then some actually say that they don't care. Like, but I guess your thoughts are this is what the employees are looking for.
Yeah. And I guess there are a few things that I'd like to add. One is that there's a lot of research around how it's healthier to spend money on experiences than on physical stuff.
Yeah.
And more than ever, from what I've been hearing anyway, Gen Z is absolutely adopting that. And I think a lot of millennials are feeling that too, right? Vacations over the new gadget. And that translates into work as well. We don't just want to clock in for the paycheck to buy the stuff. We want to have a sense of meaning and a great experience, whether that experience comes from excelling at work and feeling really proud of our contributions. It could come from the social engagement with people that we enjoy working with. It can come from feeling appreciated from with your manager or the rest of your team. It can come from so many different places, and ideally in a combination of ways. And that to me is what the hospitality piece is about. It's not just having a workspace at your fingertips, it's the experience of it. Certainly, having a space that feels like the company is going to contribute to a cultural vibe, but that's not
Yeah.
enough either. It's a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose. And also, the second piece of it is there's that old adage, it's old now, earn the commute. In my view, look, let's just eliminate the commute and keep people working inside their neighborhoods outside of the house, but keep the commute short. But if somebody does have to go somewhere, it's got to be worth it. And it's got to be worth it for them. And what makes it worth it is going to be different for every person. It's going to be different for introverts than for extroverts, for people who have kids, have distractions at home, or people who need chatter in order to focus. Everybody is so different. And so that hospitality piece is going to mean different things to different people, which is why I don't think that we can have a one size fits all. We've got to have a menu of options. And then most critically, we got to trust people enough to make informed choices themselves versus pushing things down people's throats.
Yeah, that's why I'm so glad to have you play co-host for this week, because I don't think I could have put it any better. And it speaks to another post that we included in the newsletter this week that talks about this overall. The topic is Ann Olson from the shop. Workspace talks about like you need to prioritize a couple different components, right? She's got the service, she's got intentional design elements, honest and genuine community building. But the intentional design elements is what I'm going to laser in, because to your point, people work differently, right? And so
Mhm.
there are those of us out there that do really well in quiet spaces. There are those of us that need to be a little bit more social and have a little bit more activity. And folks out there that are trying to understand and also take into consideration, I know that it's such a hot button term and I don't want to politicize the conversation, but the inclusion part of DEI, right, is making sure that you've got a hospitable, welcoming space for people that have different needs. And as
Yeah.
we start to continue to understand what the spectrum of different types of divergent or neurodivergent needs are. It's even as nuanced as I was working with a gentleman from Cushman that focuses on workspace design and workforce needs, and like even carpet design, right? There was carpet design that was so distracting and so patterned on staircases that someone with a vision problem would not be able to adequately navigate what those stairs are. So it's not just
Wow.
intentionality around the productivity aspect, but also just the safety and security, right? If you've
Yep.
got someone who has a vision problem and you're looking down and you've got this wildly patterned carpet, right, on stairs, it's not necessarily easy to even to navigate that. So I
Yep.
think it's just so fascinating to see that all these different pieces make up the larger hospitality of workspace. And I'm glad to see that this debate is quote unquote dissolving as the post stairs, because I think most definitely, I know for a fact if I put on my proximity hat, these large building owners are looking down the end of a shotgun, barrel of a shotgun, and they see just floors and floors of vacancy.
Yep.
That old, what you said, cookie cutter, one size fits all is not working. I point to the much hyped up JP Morgan headquarters. It's been in the news nonstop lately. They've got it all, right? And I actually didn't realize until this morning I read an article, they're going to have their own signature scent even. But then that leads me to then beg to ask the question of not everyone loves scent, right? And is that
Yep.
scent even maybe disruptive to someone that might have some sensitivities, right? I scent doesn't really bother me, but it's bizarre. My partner Sway, he can smell what I've eaten the minute he walks in the house. And I floor up and he's like,
Yeah.
you had onions today. Anyway, the last item that I know Hector wanted me to include, because even though he is on vacation, we have been in touch. We don't often publicize job posts, but this was really cool. It's not every day that you can work for the Royal British family. For those of you that might not realize, the Royal Crown actually owns a significant amount of land in the UK, and they actually posted this week that they're looking for someone to head up a kind of flex space director role in a different portfolio. So that was really exciting to see that even the Windsors are getting in on the flex workspace game.
Yep. It's the future.
It is. I think that's all we've got for this week. Thank you so much for joining me and
Yeah.
being co-host. This was a great excuse, if anything, for us to catch up and chit chat outside of a LinkedIn thread that I look back that's been going on since 2022. But yeah, I do
Yeah.
encourage you all check out Radius. It's a really cool platform and it's a great representative of the fact that we don't need to define co-working. Yes, terms are helpful to understand what type of space you might be encountering or what type of space you might need. But I think that there's a big, bright, beautiful tomorrow for all different types of workspaces. So thanks again for taking the time out of your schedule and joining
Yeah.
us for the recap.
Same here. Thanks for having me. And I hope Hector is having a good time on his vacation.
Yes,
Deserved.
I hope to see him well tanned next week because he's been enjoying some time in warm Mexico. I know you're in outside of Niagara Falls, so I know it's cold up there.
Yeah.
It's freezing cold where I am, and so I will be actually out next week checking out Paris. It's been a while since I've been over there, but for everyone that's listening, I'll see you in 2 weeks. But until then,
Bye, everyone.